Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined as usual by my co-host Matt Carrolley. Today we are back coming off of the bye week. We're going to talk a little bit about the Falcons' upcoming matchup for the New Orleans Saints. We'll talk about the coaching changes, some roster moves. We'll break down the All-22 from 2 weeks ago with the Seattle Seahawks, talk a little bit about the miscommunications and how that relates to some of the coaching changes that the Falcons made during the bye week. And we'll also take a look back at Austin Hooper and Grady Jarrett, arguably the two offensive and MVP respectively for the first half of the season, and take a look at some of their highlight plays to highlight some of the things that they've been doing particularly well this season on today's episode. And of course, as we often do over these last couple of weeks, we will have people be able to jump on later in the episode to give their thoughts on whatever topics that they want to discuss, whether it's the coaching changes, whether it's the Saints game, whatever it is, you guys will have the floor. And that opportunity, just look for the link in the live chat here on YouTube, and you guys can jump in later in the show. But without further ado, Matt, let's jump right into the roster moves that the Falcons made. Right now, they added a punter in Ryan Allen, formerly of the Patriots, to replace Casey Redfern. They promoted Jacob Tuioti-Mariner from the practice squad to the roster, seemingly to replace John Kaminsky, who's dealing with an ankle injury. And then they also promoted wide receiver Brandon Powell, a player that we talked about for 5 minutes, like 2 months ago when he first got added to the practice squad, about his potential to be a return threat. But we'll see why the Falcons did that. As far as I'm aware, there's not an injury at the wide receiver position. They just, for some reason, wanted to have 7 wide receivers on the roster. I guess they feel like 4 guys can replace Mohamed Sanu. That's how much they value Mohamed Sanu, so they need 4 players on the team to potentially replace him.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly the most confusing one that happened today was Brandon Powell, a guy, like you said, we maybe touched on a little bit 2 months ago. Kind of a more developed Marcus Green, or what they were looking for from Marcus Green, their 6th-round pick that they cut, and the guy that landed on the Eagles practice squad. Again, carrying 7 receivers, I'm not sure what the thinking is there. But again, as I've said before, it's tough to find logic in some of these moves as far as guys moving around, bouncing around between the practice squad and the active roster. As far as Jacob Tuioti-Mariner, you kind of hit on it right there. I think this probably has a lot to do with John Kaminsky dealing with that sprained ankle. And, now my thinking is, are we finally going to see Deadrin Senat active for the first time this season, which I know fans have been clamoring for all year, but, due to the numbers game and due to the fact that Senat's a nose tackle and teams aren't going to typically activate 2 nose tackles, don't be shocked if Tuioti-Mariner leapfrogs him based on, his positional flexibility. I don't know if he offers any special team prowess. I mean, maybe he can slot in where Kaminsky played on special teams. But I think just for the flexibility to be a defensive end and a defensive tackle, he could potentially see, playing time this Sunday against New Orleans. And then, as far as Allen goes, this was probably their best move. I feel like they actually did upgrade their punter position by bringing in Allen, the longtime Patriots punter, from 2013 to 2018. He's a lefty too, which that'll be a change of pace that we're not accustomed to seeing as a lefty punter. So hopefully he fits that role well, and maybe he's the long-term answer there. He is, I believe, several years younger than Matt Bosher, so maybe, again, if he shows well, whoever's calling the shots in the future wants to keep Ryan Allen around to be the punter for the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, he had a really good game in the bins in the Super Bowl, so maybe he'll be able to punt that way for the rest of eternity.
Yeah.
My only guess for the Brandon Powell thing is, and this is for all you fellow roster nerds out there, my only guess is that they had 6 active wide receivers last week, and I'm guessing that they're going to plan on doing that for the rest of the season, and for whatever reason, they feel like they need to have another wide receiver on the roster to be like an insurance policy in case one of their 6 wide receivers gets hurt, and then they won't be able to activate 6 wide receivers in a future week. That's the only guess I can apply any sort of real logic to it. But again, that doesn't really make a ton of sense. It's like, who cares if you have 6 wide receivers active? You only need 5. But Falcons going to Falcons. So
yeah, I mean, I really thought that this spot was going to be reserved for Chris Lindstrom, and that's something to watch this week because he did look, he's out of the boot now. He looked to be, walking, at least observing practice yesterday that they had. And so, I was going back and forth with people trying to look into, what the decision is going to have to be for him. And it seems like, once the 8-game mandate, which will be after this New Orleans game, comes into effect, the Falcons will then have 21 days to make a decision to place him on 53-man roster, and then he's free to start practicing now. But they have a 21-day window starting next week to place him on the 53-man roster. If they don't do so in that 21-day window, then he will remain on IR. So again, maybe Powell was just a placeholder now, until again that mandate now hits, and then Lindstrom will be back and eventually probably taking over that right guard spots. But yeah, who knows? As far as Powell goes, I mean, maybe they want to see what he can do at returner eventually and move on from Barner. I mean, I doubt it. But
that'll be the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
they're married to Kenyon Barner.
It seems that way. Yeah, sadly.
All right. So we're done with the roster stuff. Obviously, the Falcons made some big changes during the bye week by, when they do their sort of self-evaluation, as they often do during the bye week, they came out of it presumably thinking, hey, the mental mistakes and the miscommunications are a major problem on the back end. So let's do something about it, which I think most people would agree has been the case. I'm sure there were plenty of people complaining about why they waited till now to do it. But I would say that it's hard to make that type of switch during the middle of a week when you're trying to prepare for a game. So what the Falcons did is they decided to take Raheem Morris, their wide receiver coach, move him to help out with the defensive backs. Dave Brock, their running backs coach, will now coach the wide receivers for the remainder of the year. And Bernie Parmalee, who was their assistant special teams coach, will go back and coach the running back position. Parmalee was a former running back in the NFL, and I think with his last team was a running backs coach or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So makes sense. I mean, Raheem Morris is Dan Quinn's guy, and I thought Jeff Schultz, who we had on the show last week, made a good point on Twitter earlier this week that when Raheem Morris was initially coaching the defense when Dan Quinn hired him in 2015 and then switched to the offensive side in 2016. And as you guys may recall, that was back when everybody was, hating on Kyle Shanahan. They needed to check him. And so basically, the running theory was Dan Quinn needed one of his guys in the offensive meeting rooms to make sure that Kyle Shanahan was, basically doing his job. And then Raheem Morris wound up staying there as the wide receivers coach and served in that capacity for the last 2+ years. And so now basically Dan Quinn's like, okay, well, we need you to quote unquote fix the defense in the same way that, if you want to, maybe you want to give Raheem Morris credit for, fixing the offense back in 2016 if you want to. And so, now he's being tasked with that. And one of the things that when we get to the All-22 a little bit later, we'll show some obvious reasons why they need all the help that they can get on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, the Morris one is the one I'm, most excited for. I mean, again, these weren't the coaching changes I think fans hoped for at this point. But again, as you said, putting Dan Quinn's guy, Raheem Morris, who, by trade has been a defensive backs coach for most of his coaching career, to help clean up some of these issues that it's one of the biggest glaring weaknesses on this defense is repeatedly week in and week out, these communication breakdowns, coverage breakdowns. Raheem's the type of coach that Marquand Manuel was as far as, a motivator and again, a guy you would think could develop and get the most out of the DBs, again, because that was his, original job by trade. The wide receiver coach thing, you kind of hit on the reasons why, he was there. But yeah, so, again, as far as the others go, I mean, I think that was just, obviously they had to fill Raheem's spot. So Dave Brock was the guy because he originally was a wide receiver coach. And then obviously Bernie Parmalee seemed was fit going back to running back coach. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Again, not optimistic. We're going to see great results based on these moves alone. I mean, we're going to see results based on the players cleaning the things up, and hopefully they took the bye week to do so. But if there's one coaching change that stood out to me, it was definitely Raheem Morris going back to the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and if they cut back on the communication breakdowns, then you got to give Raheem Morris some credit for that. How much you want to give, I guess, is a matter of debate.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're not in the room, we're not in the building, so we can't really speak on that. But certainly, like, if the Falcons can clean up some of that stuff and revert back to the sort of team that they were in previous years, where they were not a team that regularly gave up big plays, which they have been this season, that will eliminate a lot of the issues the defense is having, because they're just basically just getting gashed by teams through the air, particularly early in games. The second quarter has been very problematic for them these last couple of weeks. And if they can fix that, then, they're going to be at least potentially competitive, a lot more competitive in some of these games. Whether they actually find a way to win some of these games, I'm sure many of you have some thoughts on that. But, it is one of those things where at the very least it will help them better evaluate some of these players on their roster moving forward, particularly in the secondary, if they can get better play from these guys and say, okay, it is the coaching, which I think most people would agree at this point. But I think this is a good time for our producer, Brian, to help us with the all 22 that we can transition into and look back at the Seahawks game, where the Falcons really sort of struggled with some of these miscommunication issues. And we're just going to show you guys the 2 DK Metcalf touchdowns and break down some of the issues. You see it there, right there. We'll just run it through, and you can see it better from this end zone angle, some of the stuff going down with this one. And it's just simply they don't get lined up properly. Seahawks, sort of catch them sleeping in this regard. And in this situation, presumably the Falcons are going to Casey's going to try to line up here and play man coverage. And so there, with the stack concept, Casey's going to cover Tyler Lockett, who's going to release into the flat. And then in that situation, Isaiah Oliver is going to go with DK Metcalf wherever he goes. But because Casey's not lined up here, Oliver presumably looks at Lockett releasing into the flat and goes with him, because there's no chance for Casey to get out there. And because Casey's not really paying attention, he's trying to get out there to cover Lockett, and DK Metcalf goes right in front of him. So I think, Matt, if you have anything else to add, I think the thing that Matt and I came to the agreement was that this play is really mostly due to them not getting lined up. And if anybody want to blame, it'd probably be Casey, because he was the guy that didn't get lined up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pure leverage play that Oliver's doing on the fly. I mean, he sees obviously Casey's not going to get out there to cover Lockett in the flat, so he takes him. And as Aaron pointed out, the lack of awareness by KZ, because he's got his eyes in the backfield instead of the receivers and what they're doing, doesn't he's not able to pick up and see that Metcalf's just sliding inside over the middle, and it's an easy slam dunk touchdown. So while you can fault both of them for the lack of getting set it up or the lack of communication, if it was us grading it, or I'll speak for myself, if it was me grading it, I'd put this more on KZ, just from an awareness standpoint, not seeing what's happening, not seeing Oliver basically picking up his man, and he should have went on Oliver's man, DK Metcalf, in the slot, and it wouldn't have been a wide open touchdown then, at least.
Yeah. So here's the second play. Just wanted to run it through while Matt was talking, and you'll see I'll run it through again. Again, pretty similar concept, stack concept, over route for DK Metcalf, goes wide open. And again, we'll show you the end zone angle. In this situation, when you have these sort of stacks like this, these bunches, whatever you want to call them, typically the way that most teams run them is the inside corner, in this case, Demonte Casey here, will take whichever one of these two receivers releases inside. And then Oliver will take whichever one of these receivers releases outside. However, you can also play it where Casey has the inside guy, no matter what, even if he releases outside into the flat, and then Oliver picks up Metcalf, the outside guy, no matter where he goes. And so essentially on this play, Oliver's playing it the first way, where he's going to take the outside guy, and Casey's playing it the second way, where he's just going to follow this slot receiver. I can't remember if it was David Moore or somebody else. And basically, this is purely lack of communication. And these two guys, you want them to be on the same page, and they play it completely differently. And it winds up, you see Casey immediately jump outside. You see Oliver sort of, jam and then prepare to get that guy. And so, Metcalf runs wide open, free into the end zone for a touchdown. Matt, you have any other thoughts on that play?
I mean, this one's open for more interpretation than I think the first one is. Again, like you said, there's a couple different ways to play this, and without being in the huddle and knowing what the call is, it's tough to place the blame on either one. So really, here is more of a 50-50 at fault between Oliver and KZ. Again, without knowing the call, you're not sure how it should have been played. And again, just goes back to the lack of communication in the secondary room. And this is hopefully something, that, Raheem Morris could have a positive impact on and maybe can simplify the game a little bit for these guys and teach it in a different manner so that, we're not seeing these things over and over again, because we're seeing teams take advantage of these crossing routes. I mean, there was a kind of a similar example to, if you guys remember the Tennessee one, where they ran that long Yankee concept. I mean, again, those mesh concepts, those crossing concepts are really, confusing the Falcons DBs, and, their teams are going to continue to go at it until they get their communication right. So hopefully, again, Raheem Morris can have a positive impact on that.
Okay, so there you have it, guys, with the Seahawks All-22. Now we want to sort of jump into showing some highlight plays from Austin Hooper and Grady Jarrett. And as we often do, we'll show two plays, sort of highlighting first with Austin Hooper, and then we'll show two plays for Grady Jarrett. And this is the first play. It comes from the Week 6 Cardinals game where Austin Hooper, I'll let Matt describe it. Basically, you see Austin Hooper, he's going to run a crossing route and show his ability to make a nice grab in traffic.
Yeah, so, one of the first, abilities we want to highlight of Hooper here is just his ability at the catch point, attacking the football, winning contested catches. Matt Haley from AtlantaFalcons.com put out an article over the week, that he took a deep dive into next gen stats and showed that of the top 10 receivers in the league, Austin Hooper trails only Michael Thomas in catch rate above expectation, which is basically, kind of shows, a player's ability to make catches that they're really not expected to make. And I feel like this would classify as one. You can see the safety kind of coming on Hooper's back already before the ball gets there. But Hooper, throughout the season has shown an ability to really attack the ball before it even gets into his chest. Some receivers will wait and body catch it, but Hooper uses his hands and attacks it. And this is a prime example of it right here, kind of shielding the defender on his back, going out and getting the ball and making a tough catch and moving the chains.
Yeah. And, this is a play, Matt's the positive one, I'm the negative one. So I'm gonna find the fault in the play. And this is a perfect play where this should have been play action, which I think would have made a much easier window for Matt Ryan to throw into, because that would have sucked up these linebackers, and this play would have been even more wide open. But because there's no action in the backfield, it doesn't really hold the linebackers as much, and Matt Ryan's forced to make probably a tougher throw than he needs to make. But again, it was an outstanding throw, outstanding catch there from Hooper, and certainly a thing where when you can put that ball and trust that your receiver is going to, go get the football in that situation and make a key grab on a key down to help, move the chains and keep a drive alive. That's basically what Austin Hooper has done this season for the Falcons. So with that said, let's get to the other play.
I mean, a couple other ones while Aaron uploads that one. The one against the Colts was another one where tight quarters in the red zone, Matt Ryan having the trust to go to Hooper in a tight spot and for Hooper to attack the football, again, and not wait for it to get into his body. It's just a very underrated aspect of his game, and it's what's made him such a reliable target for Matt Ryan and this Falcons offense.
And the other thing we wanted to highlight about Hooper is his ability after you catch. You're going to see on this play, he does a nice little hurdle to get a first down on, I think it was a 2nd and 7, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Or just basically, you see in this play, because
Hooper's going to catch this ball 5 yards short of the sticks.
Yeah,
with two guys closing down on him, and this hurdle move, it's becoming a staple of his. I mean, we've seen it how many times in the last couple of years, and he uses it effectively here, and then he's able to even, kind of with a defender, around his waist, able to stretch and reach the football out across the down marker and pick up a Falcons first down. So again, I think it's been well documented. Hooper's probably his best ability is his ability after the catch, and we're seeing it here. But then, as we showed in the other play, I think his ability to attack the football and, present a target to his quarterback, I would say is his second one. But yeah, that was a great one there and shows off that hurdle move that we all love to see from Austin Hooper.
Yeah. And next, let's jump into Grady Jarrett. And the first play is the sack that he got in the Week 1 game, where he absolutely abused the Vikings left guard throughout this game. And this is going to be, we'll just run it through and then you'll get a better idea. With the speed to get the sack, obviously, the Vikings wind up recovering that strip. But certainly Grady Jarrett did a great job on that play. You'll see it better from the end zone angle, just using pure speed to sort of, whoop this guy. Perfect play.
Yeah, he kind of does a swipe move, chop, going to his right to get around Elfline. Again, taking advantage of an inexperienced player. That's what you expect, a star veteran defensive tackle to do. He did it, also to the rookie center making his debut, Garrett Bradbury. Just a thing of beauty from Grady Jarrett.
And the next play is going to be just, one of the preferred moves that Grady Jarrett has been abusing guys on throughout this season has been his swim move. I'll run it through. What he does to Mike Iupati on this play is brutal. You'll see even better from the end zone angle what he does and to get the stop behind the line of scrimmage. But this is a pretty nasty swim move up there in, the pantheon of guys like Jarrell Casey. In terms of, just abusing offensive linemen. There it is. Boom.
Yeah, doesn't get much cleaner, much faster than that. And, we showed you what he did to an inexperienced player in Pat Elfline. In the first video that, Mike Iupati is a former Pro Bowler. I mean, he's past his prime, but still he's been around the block. So for Grady to do this, he can also take advantage of some, former accomplished guards as well. And yeah, it doesn't get much better than that. And as Aaron said, that arm over move, that swim move, that's kind of his patented go-to, and he's abused quite a few offensive linemen this year with that move.
Yeah. Well, guys, there's our sort of all 22 breakdown. So if anybody wants to sort of jump in and join the show, you can check out the links in the live chat on YouTube, that StreamYard.com link, and jump into our green room and, join us on the show and talk about whatever you want to talk about. We'll just let you guys know that there are tendencies for lots of people who want to chat. And so, when you jump on and when you get pulled up onto the show, then by all means, sort of get in and get out, get straight to your question. just in case we have some other people sort of waiting in line to jump on with us. I should also remind you guys that we are only planning on doing an hour show. So we will be off by 9 o'clock. So again, first come, first serve type of basis if you want to chat with us. But now is a good time to talk a little bit about the current injuries that the Falcons are dealing with and potentially how some of these things could wind up affecting them this upcoming week against the New Orleans Saints. We've seen Desmond Trufant out of the lineup with a toe injury. That's a really problematic injury because of how much the Saints love to throw the ball to Michael Thomas. And one scenario that the Falcons could potentially have deployed it with a healthy Desmond Trufant, should he not return this week, would be to have Trufant shadow Michael Thomas, and that would allow for much easier matchups for some of the other Falcon corners in this matchup. You would probably in that situation have Kendall Sheffield go on Ted Ginn because you want to get speed on speed, and then Isaiah Oliver or DeMonte Casey, probably DeMonte Casey, if it was me, would probably wind up covering Austin Carr, who spends a good amount of time playing in the slot as well. And so without Trufant,
have we seen that in the past though with Trufant? I don't think we've ever seen them use Trufant against Michael Thomas in that fashion. Because I remember in that first matchup,
they had Robert Alford because they didn't need to. I think that was part of it.
So you think? I mean, I would hope you're right, but I still have my doubts, even with how bad it's been. Because again, I don't recall when Trufant was out there this year. They've used that technique, that shadow technique with him on any.
They shadowed in week 1 against the Vikings with him and Diggs and Oliver on Thielen.
Okay. Seems like forever ago, but yeah.
Yeah, it was forever ago. It's fair that.
But yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, that's how I would do it as well. You got it again. I mean, you rationalize paying a guy the way they have, and there's all this talk about him not living up to his contract as a cornerback one. These are the moments where he should be in that role, especially with moving on with your cornerback 2 and Robert Alford, and you have some inexperienced guys. There's no reason not to have Trufant shadowing, one of the best receivers in football in Michael Thomas. But again, we digress about some of the coaching moves, and that's part of what's got them in this mess to begin with, is not smart coaching decisions in certain aspects.
So I think we have Zamir in the green room. Zamir, what do you got for us tonight?
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good, Zamir. How you doing?
I was just wondering. I heard nobody talking about Dan Quinn press conference after Rams game. I don't know if you guys listened to it. I didn't hear you guys anything mention or anybody else for that matter. Somebody asked him about head coach duties, and is he overwhelmed with it, or is it too much to be play calling and be head coach? And he answered that actually was becoming very hard, so he gave up play calling duties to some of his assistant coaches. And follow-up question was to explain, but he didn't go much into it. He just said started in second half against Arizona, and continued through Rams game. They didn't call, his coaching staff didn't call all game, but they starting Arizona second half, they were play calling for him. He
right.
Didn't play call.
And I think, from what I've read and seen, I think Bob Sutton was eliminated in that role. I think it's come down to Jeff Ulbrich, the linebacker coach, and Jerome Henderson, the pass game coordinator. I think those are the two guys that have been helping with that responsibility since the Arizona game.
Oh, Did you guys notice
Anything different?
anything better? I mean, better scheme, or is that why they are confused getting play calls from
I
three
mean,
different
they've
sources?
been confused, all
Yeah,
season.
that's right.
So it hasn't necessarily cut down on that, but Aaron, I think you would agree that the Seattle performance was one of their better efforts on defense, on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah,
Yeah,
second half.
they've been playing pretty consistently a lot of man coverage since the halftime against the Arizona game. So really, if if Dan Quinn is getting help from his play calls, basically the help is like just play more man coverage. That's basically it.
Is that why this coaching change happened? Do you think?
Uh,
You mean
just to
because Raheem Morris is going to help Dan Quinn with the play
Yeah,
calling?
I mean, is that why he made that?
I mean, it's possible, but I assume that he's going to work more closely from what I've heard. Again, yeah, I think he's just really going to be working more closely with the secondary to try to work out whatever issues that they're dealing with right now.
Yeah, because I do think the secondary has been, people want to point to the pass rush, and that's fair, but I do think the secondary has been one of the biggest, if not the biggest issue. Just when I keep going back to that stat, and I said it on last week's show, it was going into either the Rams game or the Seattle game, but when you're giving up 253 passing yards of your 270, and it's coming within 3 seconds of the snap count, that's more of either a play calling and or a coverage issue as far as not being able to stop the first read, and the quarterback can just quick go to that first read and get the ball in his hands. So I think the coverage has a lot to do with the struggles of this defense. Obviously we highlight the miscommunication issues. So I really think transitioning Raheem Morris back to his natural coaching spot is done for a last-ditch effort to help turn that unit around and make it as good as it can be for the rest of the season.
One more quick. I heard somebody, I cannot remember, but somebody mentioned by PFF our third best defensive player is John Kaminsky. Of course, he had limited snaps, but still, he's right behind Jarrett, and I believe second is
Deion Jones.
Deion Jones.
Yep.
And then him. Did you guys, because you guys watch film all the time, do you guys notice what he does good? I noticed that if he gets hands on somebody, he's usually pretty sure tackler, but I didn't notice so much out there.
Yeah, I mean, Kaminsky, appreciate the question, Zamir. Kaminsky does a good job against the run. I wouldn't put too much in the Pro Football Focus grade just because it's kind of weird when players have like a low snap count. And basically, like if you basically play 4 plays and one of them's a positive play, you're going to get a really high grade, even though like it's one of those things where it's like, it's not as if like Kaminsky's out there balling or anything, but he's made a couple of positive plays. And I think really more importantly for him, as opposed to several other players and pretty much everybody else on the team other than Grady Jarrett, is he doesn't have that many negative plays in terms of like plays where he's getting pancaked down the field or completely losing his gap responsibility or anything like that. So I think Kaminsky's done a pretty good job against the run, mostly subbing in for Alan Bailey, or when the Falcons played their pure base defense and they'll put him at the strong side defensive end and have Tack on the other side, then have like Beasley sort of playing their Sam linebacker role. And he's done a pretty good job. So he's a player that I think certainly is deserving of more playing time. But at the same time, I think if people are sort of all, believing, I've heard a lot of people being like, they need to play Kaminsky so that, we can get a look at him rather than Vic and Tack. But I don't think Kaminsky's really going to be eating into those guys' snaps as much as people think. He would be eating into maybe Alan Bailey's snaps, maybe you could have him eat into Jack Crawford's snaps because Jack Crawford's been struggling. And I would, I think that Pro Football Focus grade is pretty accurate for Crawford. I think he's like a 38 or something like that.
He's the bottom. He's the last one. That's why I was asking about John Kaminsky. Can he kind of steal some snaps from Jack Crawford?
It's possible. I don't think we've seen him featured in that interior pass rush role.
Since the preseason.
We saw some, I guess, in the preseason, but not in the regular season. We've actually seen, last week was, I think, the first time we've seen in 2019 of Tack in the interior. Primarily it's been Claiborne as the number one guy inside next to Jarrett and nickel. Crawford would be the second guy. It seems like Tack might be now cutting into Crawford snaps there. So again, maybe he takes Crawford's, whatever's left of Crawford snaps, but I kind of agree with Aaron. I don't necessarily think that's in the cards necessarily yet. I think, taking maybe Alan Bailey snaps at strong side defensive end is probably where we'd see him. But, again, I also think, unless a guy qualifies for the number of snaps that Pro Football Focus determines for an actual grade, I wouldn't put too much stock in him being the third graded Falcons defender this season. It's just too early to tell. But, as the season wears on, I think we should, see more of Kaminsky, hopefully, just to get a better feel of what to expect going into 2020.
Yeah. I talked with a couple of people on Twitter about this, a couple of days ago. And for me, it's like, I think he should get more snaps, but I don't feel like the Falcons need to rush to get him snaps now. It's like that's something that you can kind of wait until week 13, week 14, once we get into December, and it's like, okay, we're 2-10 or whatever the record is at that point. And, you can sort of then decide, okay, let's see as much of John Kaminsky as we possibly can get at this point in time because he needs the reps. And, Alan Bailey and Crawford don't. But I think in the meantime, I do think going with the trio of Claiborne, Tack, and Grady Jarrett, and then deciding whether or not you want Bailey or Crawford or Davison or possibly Kaminsky to be the fourth guy. I mean, and of course Vic Beasley. That's really the conversation the Falcons need to have. And right now, I wouldn't necessarily put Kaminsky at the top of that list based off of what he has shown so far. But that is something that I think as we get closer to the end of the season, you might as well just throw him out there to see if maybe he could show a lot more than what he's shown so far.
Yeah. And I mean, if they were able to orchestrate a trade for Vic Beasley, it would have been nice then at that point you can, dish him out there, maybe a nickel, and have him be an edge rusher and see if, again, to figure out, can he be an edge rusher, in nickel sets, or is he a guy that you have to kick inside in those types of situations? So, that would have been nice to see and a reason, even more of a reason to try to move on from Vic, but alas, that didn't happen. I do want to kind of talk a little bit. There was another trade that was discussed, in the week leading up to the trade deadline. Ian Rappaport kind of dropped a little mini bomb on Wednesday after the trade deadline, saying that the Lions and the Falcons had extensive talks over running back Devontae Freeman, and Rappaport followed it up and said that compensation wasn't the issue in the deal, and it just came down to the Falcons not wanting to pull the trigger on trading their starting running back. I know Aaron and I, we've went back and forth on Twitter, but in case, those people didn't see those takes, I feel like we should talk a little bit about that. You felt pretty strongly, at least as far as why moving on from Devontae would have been an issue in relation to the pass blocking. And, while I do think that's a fair take, because Devontae has been leaps and bounds the best and pretty much only reliable pass blocker on the Falcons, seeing as though, Ito Smith keeps getting concussions when he's tasked with that role one-on-one with a guy. And, we haven't seen much of Hill and Allison. But, for me, and again, we don't know what the compensation was. I'm under the impression and assumption that it was something like, a 5th round pick, maybe in 2020, and maybe another conditional draft pick in a future year. If Devontae Freeman is in the Lions roster next year, which wouldn't have been guaranteed since none of his base salaries would have been guaranteed. So in that regard, I still would have done that move. Again, we're looking at a guy there's a good chance the next regime doesn't keep him around. So, if you're going to make him a cap casualty and have a dead cap hit, at least get some sort of draft pick. It could be future ammunition to package and move up in the draft. So, I would have been comfortable trying to figure out that whole pass blocking thing out because, again, this team kept 5 running backs, 6 if you can count the fullback. They had to feel a certain type of way about them. What better situation than to evaluate them and see what they can do than by moving on from Devontae Freeman and figuring it out? Because again, if these are going to be the future running backs on the team, you have to know if they can pass block or not. You're not going to know unless you put them in the game. So that's basically my big thing. And again, I understand, Matt Ryan's going to be dropping back to pass quite a bit the rest of the season, but you can't play scared and you got to see what these guys have at some point. So, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts. Do you want to elaborate or defend your take? But I just feel like if that was the compensation for me, it's better to get something for him than get nothing when you cut him in 2020.
No, I get that take. I don't disagree with that take. I just think, I guess to summarize sort of what I was saying was, I don't have a problem with the Falcons not pulling the trigger on it, even though it may not be the move that I would have made in that situation, just because I think really trading Devontae Freeman only really helps you out in 2020. And I guess my point was that this coaching staff and this front office doesn't really care about 2020 because, the coaching staff's not going to be here. And it's debatable whether the front office is going to be here. And so they're more of like, what's going to help us win week 10? What's going to help us beat the Saints? What's going to help us go 3-3 in the division? What's going to help us beat the Jaguars or the 49ers? And we face some pretty formidable pass rushes coming up. And so sort of rolling the dice on a Brian Hill, who did showcase good pass protecting ability in the preseason, but then when he had the opportunities against Seattle, both times he was asked to do that, he basically blew his assignment, and one of them wound up being a sack on Matt Schaub. And then you mentioned Ito Smith and Quadri Olson, who was a good pass protector, reasonably good pass protector in college, really struggled with pass protection in the preseason, and Kenyon Barner has not been really a reliable option there. And so I think the Falcons, understandably, given a completely different set of priorities, trying to win games this year, which I know for 99% of our fan base is not at all their priority and is the last thing that they want to see. I think we're justified in deciding that keeping Devontae Freeman rather than, gambling Matt Ryan's health and this offense's ability to pass protect, which we know is going to be something that they're going to be asked to do frequently this year, just to gain, a 5th round pick for the next coaching regime, at least from their perspective, doesn't make a ton of sense. So that's part of the reason why I haven't been as critical of them not pulling the trigger on this deal, because from their perspective, it doesn't really make that much sense to trade Devontae Freeman at this point in time. It only really makes sense if you don't care about the next 8 games, which clearly this coaching staff has no reason to think that way. But obviously our fan base and various people in the media obviously have moved on from this season. So I understand people's thinking that this was dumb for the Falcons to trade it, but it's just because you have completely different priorities for what you're trying to see. You're trying to get cap space for 2020. You're trying to get an extra draft pick for 2020. And, this coaching staff is trying to win games in 2019, and they're just completely different priorities.
I mean, was it just, I know I'm not asking the right person on this when I bring up the Sanu trade, but was it just that was an offer they couldn't refuse? Because, I would argue trading Sanu doesn't necessarily help them win games the rest of the season. But
you'd be right. I the counter I would say is that they could easily fill the Sanu void, presumably because they have Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and Austin Hooper. And so you could argue that
again, though, what's the thinking of keeping all those running backs if you don't think that they could potentially be, game day active running backs that can contribute if need to, if called upon? Because again,
Well,
I would have said wide receiver and running back were the two deepest position groups, and therefore you can, take, you can absorb the blow of trading a Sanu and a Freeman because of how deep those positions were. Whereas, I know we all pushed for a Vic Beasley trade, but the roster really wasn't set up to absorb a blow like that, despite Vic's lack of production there. I mean, they were very thin at edge, so I would have been worried on how they would have made that up had they traded Vic. But again, keeping all those running backs, you got to feel like they can contribute if you needed to. And this was an opportunity, I thought, to get something for Freeman and see what these guys can do.
Well, because again, I think the reason why they kept all those running backs is because they expected Allison and Hill and Smith to make bigger contributions in 2020 than necessarily 2019.
But you're just going to go blind in there thinking that without having any really tangible evidence besides preseason games, and you can only get so much out of preseason games. Whereas this was an actual 8-game slate to really evaluate, like, all right, can these guys actually contribute for us in 2020, or do we have to?
I guess I was saying, like, that's why those guys won roster spots in August, that they were thinking about 2020. Obviously, now their priorities completely shift, and they're just thinking about 2019. And I think they never really intended for those guys to be much of major contributors in 2019. They were just stashing those guys in their back pocket.
Well, they also were under the assumption too that 2019 was going to be a successful season, and they weren't.
That's what I'm saying.
But now it's not. So again, if Thomas Dimitroff is fighting for his job, one way a GM, in my opinion, fights for his job is to help position the team for future success. And again, we don't know the compensation. Maybe the compensation wasn't even as good as I'm speculating. But again, I posed this question. I don't know if it was to you or to someone else on Twitter. If Thomas Dimitroff knows deep down whether it's him or someone else calling the shots, and again, I guess it would have to be posed to him. If he knew in his heart that Devontae Freeman might be a cap casualty, how do you rationalize not trying to get something for him? But again, we kind of discussed that, so I don't want to go too much in a circle. But that's why it's a head scratcher for me. I understand pass blocking is probably the biggest concern moving forward if he was gone, but I feel like that's something you can mask, or at least try to mask and get by with. I think it's a little bit of an over-exaggeration to think that's the only reason you don't make this move. But,
well, I think that's the biggest reason. I don't think that's the only. I think the main reason is I think the Falcons think that Devontae Freeman is their best running back. Now,
well, I think he is, but
I think we could, I'm sure there's many people watching the show right now or listening to the show right now that disagree with that notion, which is fine. Like, I'm not going to
chime in. The phone lines are open, so we want to get your takes on this if anybody has.
I just think it really just boils down to they felt that they would have a better chance of winning games right now with Devontae Freeman on the roster than they would without him on the roster. And the compensation. Now, again, if you're talking about comparing it to the Sanu trade, if Detroit had been offering like a second-round pick, then I think they probably would have taken that. But I think we kind of all can agree that and assume, this is an assumption, but yeah, I think we all are pretty confident that they weren't blowing them away with the sort of compensation that they were bringing to the table there. So
right.
I think it just ultimately kind of just boils down to the Falcons have different priorities. Again, I'm not saying that they made the right call. I just think, from my perspective, deciding to trade Devontae Freeman to get a day 3 pick and then going on the street or trusting in Brian Hill to be able to hold up in pass protection is a gamble that I don't think is necessary to make just to get a 5th round pick. I feel like that's not really something. Now, maybe we can have that conversation if the compensation was a 3rd. Maybe we can have that conversation if the compensation was potentially a 4th. Then I think it's really debatable. But without really knowing what the compensation, I think we're speaking in vagaries. And so I guess I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt that they weren't giving up on some great offer from the Lions to make that trade, especially since the Lions were really just going to be renting Devontae Freeman for 8 games and then wind up cutting him in the offseason. So that's sort of where I come at it from.
Yeah.
You're just watching the Devontae Freeman highlights, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm mesmerized by peak Devontae.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we haven't got much of that. We've gotten spurts, but again, my take on Devontae is, I admit I feel like he has maybe lost a step. I don't know too if he's adjusted his game, based on some of the advice he's gotten from guys like Warwick Dunn, and maybe we're not seeing, reckless and violent Devontae that we're seeing in some of these clips above. But I think too the situation, the run blocking and the play calling, I'd put more at fault for Devontae's, regression in numbers than I would his actual performance. Because again, I do think in the right situation, I think in Detroit, I was looking at Detroit's run blocking grades for their starting offensive linemen. They're all pretty impressive. So I would have liked to seen him in that offense kind of, to get one last run to show what he can do. And again, I would put the fault more at the feet of Dirk Cutter and the run blocking. I mean, even, I threw out Jake Matthews' Pro Football Focus numbers. He's been good in pass blocking, 11th out of 74 qualifying tackles. But in run blocking, he's been 67th out of 74, and just across the board. But, just to highlight a Pro Bowl caliber player, not necessarily playing up to his standard in run blocking. It's kind of just, been pervasive across the entire unit, and Devontae, has suffered because of it. So again, while people want to disrespect and speak badly about Devontae Freeman, again, maybe he's not a top 5 back like I argued over the summer, but I certainly think top half of the league. He can still do it. I mean, he can still make some defenders miss. We just haven't seen much of it because of the parts around him. Yeah.
And when you talk about the play calling, are you referring, because we've talked about this, and I think we talked about it a couple of times on the show as well. Is some of that you're talking about sort of the switch and blocking scheme where we're running a lot more inside zone than outside zone?
I think it's some of that, but I think it's also just the predictable nature that we've seen at times too. I mean, if teams know what's coming, and again, Dirk, there's been times, I mean, we talked about it in the Arizona second half. I think that was, the best Dirk we've seen as far as he got less predictable when he would throw out the heavy sets, the heavy personnel sets. But prior to that, I mean, again, you could tell when they were running the football, and it was obvious. So that's some of it as well. But I do think, Devontae Freeman excelled in the wide zone, and we're not seeing as much of that. Now, I did say over the summer, though, I thought he'd be fine in the inside zone. I thought Ito Smith would benefit the most probably because I think that's more his game. But Devontae Freeman certainly, I think, is a scheme, a versatile type of player. So I wouldn't put it more on that as I would just the predictable nature of it. And again, it doesn't matter what the scheme is if the guys up front aren't executing on it. And I think that's what we're seeing. But I think switching the scheme a little bit too probably throws him off a bit, and it's an adjustment.
So. Yeah, I think maybe you can blame Jake not run blocking as well, maybe on the scheme. Maybe that's fair. I don't know how much you can blame on it, but just because he was just so good for the last couple of years in sort of that outside zone scheme, I can't help but point out that the Brian Hill touchdown, as you guys just watched some Brian Hill highlights from the preseason, the Brian Hill touchdown last week against Seattle was an outside zone run. And we saw Hooper. That was one option play that we could have highlighted for Hooper, where him and Alex Mack made that sort of key block on the second level to create that alley that Brian Hill with his speed and quickness would have been capable of running through. And I think it's fair for people to say that Devontae has lost a step and isn't quite the same player that he was. I think people exaggerate that to act like he's on the same level as like 2014 Steven Jackson. Where he's just like, a slow moving train, slowly being derailed as he's running. I think that's an over exaggeration, but certainly Hill and Smith have shown that they have a little bit more juice and maybe getting those guys a lot more reps in the ground game, I think would potentially benefit the Falcons run game and be a little bit more consistent. So again, I understand everybody's criticisms from not pulling the trigger on that trade. I just think it just boils down to the team thinks that Davante is going to help them win more games in 2019, and I think they are. I don't necessarily 1,000% agree with that, but I like 9,900% agree with it. That I think they're completely justified in thinking that way.
Yeah, and just to touch on some of the numbers, I mean, the cap savings wouldn't have been, a lot if they had executed this trade. His base salary is $3.75 million, so they would have saved half of that this year, and then they would have automatically had to assume a $6 million, dead cap charge for Davante. His total cap hit in 2020, if he's still on the team, I believe is like $9.5 million. So we're talking.
They would save like 3.5.
They're saving three and a half in 2020. So now by not, trading him, they're going to have to eat the rest of the 1.8 million. But assuming, right. But assuming, post June 1 cuts come back into play. And again, that's all contingent on getting a new CBA signed and delivered by probably free agency of next year. Assuming that all happens, Falcons can post June 1 them and only have to realize 3 million of that 6 million, and they can spread it out. So they would save 6 million next year, which again is probably better, because if you're talking replacement costs of Devontae Freeman, with the 6 million dead cap hit plus whatever, if you're going to tender Brian Hill or sign a draft pick, you're likely not saving much, if at all, with your replacement running back. So again, the money aspect, I don't know, is as much of a reason why it was necessary to execute a Devontae Freeman trade. For me, it's just, getting a draft pick. And again, being in how aggressive the Falcons usually are, and who knows, again, who's calling the shots with the picks. But, you could package something like that and move up and get one of your guys in the draft. If you had another fifth, or, who knows, maybe it was a 4th round pick, but I probably doubt it.
So correct me if I'm wrong from what you explained, because I don't think they're going to have post June 1 cuts next year, because I just call it pessimism, but I just don't see the CBA getting done in the next 5 months or whatever it is. But if basically if they cut Davante, let's say in March, they're only save about $3.5 million next year.
Right.
So essentially, had they traded Davante today, or if they wait to cut him in March, they're not really gaining any significant cap savings.
They would have just saved the 1.8 million of the rest of his.
Yeah, they would have been able to carry over into.
Yeah, and again, when we're talking about potentially extending Austin Hooper here, I mean, that savings could be the prorated portion of a signing bonus to get done in this current year. And again,
but they have like $5 million.
They can still do it. The Sanu trade helped them to accomplish that if they want to do that. But the more certainly will help this team. Any more you can roll over into 2020 is going to help this team. So yeah, that would be the extent of their savings, whether they traded them now or, again, if you don't believe post June 1 cuts are going to be a thing, the dead cap's going to be the same then in 2020. And it's just a matter of what you would have saved for the rest of this year would have been like 1.85 million or something like that.
Okay. So, isn't that what we're paying? Who is it? Matt Schaub, basically. We would have saved enough to afford another Matt Schaub type of player.
And it's a little less, because I'm looking at if they were to, because Brian Hill is a restricted free agent next year. So, again, a lot of people are speculating, talking, like he might be back. Again, that all comes down to who they hire as a future coach. But if they were to tender him, the original round tender, which means if any team wanted to sign him or match that tender, or I guess they have to offer him a new contract, right? Or is it just give him the tender? Right? Do you know how that works?
He's a restricted, right?
Yeah. So is it another team would have to offer a new contract, or they can just say, So, if Brian Hill was given the original round tender and another team wanted to sign him away from the Falcons, they would have to give the Falcons a 5th round pick, because that's where Brian Hill was drafted back in 2017. So the original round tender is going to be over $2 million. So again, cutting or trading Devontae Freeman this year would have given them almost that amount of funds that they might have had to get another extra $500,000. But that's kind of what you're looking at as far as if you want to bring Brian Hill back. You're not saving a whole lot as opposed to just keeping Devontae Freeman. So if you think Brian Hill's the better player in the current year in 2020, then it makes sense. If you don't, then again, you might want to look elsewhere for running backs. And that's why, I threw out on Twitter this past week, and as far as my needs list goes for this team, I don't have running back up there high. Just from the standpoint that, again, I'd be comfortable bringing Brian Hill back. But I just think this team's issues go, much further than running back. And as I pointed out, I think, and this is the whole premise of the running backs don't matter debate is, the scheme and the blocking does mean more unless you have one of those elite talents, which again, peak Devontae, I thought was in that realm, but now whether it's his change of play style to preserve his career or just him losing a step due to some of the injuries, he's not quite there yet. So unless you're going out and getting one of those guys like a Saquon Barkley or a Christian McCaffrey, running backs don't necessarily matter. So you can kind of take that committee approach, and that's kind of where I'm at. I want to see, what future scheme, what future coach we have before I sit down and say, all right, let's go get a stud running back. Because if the scheme's good and you trust the scheme, there's no need to sink premium resources in another running back when you do have a few guys on the roster that I think could get that job done, or at least, get first cracks at an opportunity to get that job done.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I got to tell you, Matt. You just got to, whatever you think, whatever you want to happen, expect the Falcons to do the opposite. So if you don't think running backs matter, they're going to go out here and they're going to go out there and, break the bank for Carlos Hyde or Frank Gore or somebody like Melvin Gordon, or they're going to use one of their first 2 picks on a running back, and we're going to be having this conversation. Whatever conversation you don't want to be having with me on the podcast in a couple of months, we are definitely going to have that conversation. So by you not putting the running back on the top of your list of needs, you have just jinxed it, and the Falcons are going to make it a huge priority to go out there and get a new running back there. So I'm just telling you, heads up.
And that is why all Falcons fans for the rest of the season need to adopt another team just for the last 8 games, just so they can watch some good football, see, teams, make smart decisions, I guess you could say. Because you're right. The Falcons continually do this to us. But it's kind of like a marriage, we sign our lives away to them. For whatever reason, we love them unconditionally, I guess. But yeah, we'll see.
This is why you shouldn't sign contracts when you're 8 years old.
Right? If I could tell 10-year-old me this was a mistake, I'd certainly go back in that time machine and do it. But yeah, here we are. But yeah, there's a lot to happen from now and then. We're gonna try to cover it as much as we can, as far as coaching changes, GM changes, coordinator changes, what kind of schemes they run. That's why we're gonna keep that all 22 feature probably going into the off season, and I think it's gonna come in handy because whoever they do end up hiring to be the next man to lead that team, we're going to try to get into some of that guy's former film and see what he's going to have to offer to this team, and hopefully it's cutting edge, and hopefully it's keeping up with the times and not going back to the Stone Age.
Yeah, so we're probably going to be ducking out pretty soon, but I do have one question I need to ask you, Matt, because I saw you tweeting about it. I just need some clarification. So Chris Lindstrom can come back next week?
So yeah, it sounds like the 8-game, it's an 8-game mandate from what I've seen. So this New Orleans game upcoming is the 8th game for him to sit out. So once that happens, a 21-day window opens up where the Falcons have to decide, all right, we're going to put him on our 53-man roster. And if they don't do it in that 21-day window, then he has to stay on IR for the rest of the year, is my understanding.
Okay. All right.
So I had originally thought Yeah, I had originally thought that clock started, and next week they would had to have made a decision. But it does sound like, based on an article I saw from a Ravens player, it does sound like the 21-day window starts next week, and that's when they have to make a decision by if they want to see him at all for the rest of the year.
Now, Matt, I know your top choice for potential GM candidates to replace Thomas Dimitroff, who broke your heart for the very last time by not trading Devontae Freeman, is the assistant GM for the Colts.
That's correct.
But our producer Brian is throwing up an article that has some potential candidates. I guess we can discuss some of these, like Joe Douglas with the Eagles.
Well, Joe Douglas is on the Jets now. No, he's the Jets GM. Yeah, I believe that's the guy.
I feel like Joe Douglas was in the headlines recently, and that was when he took the Jets job. You're right. You're right.
Yeah. So he's off the board. I can't really read that, but Ed Dodds is my top choice. Just to give a little background on him, Ed Dodds was in the front office of Seattle from 2007 to 2016. So he oversaw and received some credit for creating that Legion of Boom. And I think it would be as seamless of a transition, because I do like some of the foundational pieces of what Quinn and Dimitroff did in the draft, as far as putting the focus back on the athlete and drafting athletes. Now, I will say there needs to be some connection between being an athlete and being a football player and having that football IQ. And maybe the Falcons have gotten away from that recently, and Ed can bring that back. But, Ed values the athlete. They covet the athlete. We've seen it in Indianapolis now, being the right-hand man with Chris Ballard. So there wouldn't be a lot, I don't think, changing from that. And I think it would be a seamless transition. And hope, the hope is he would only improve upon that process. But, he's widely regarded as one of the best, if not the best, scouting mind out there that's not a GM. And again, he had a lot to do with the success of Seattle and their Super Bowl team and Super Bowl contending team. So that's why he's my top guy. I mean, there's other candidates out there, but I think they should put the full court press on him if they can.
And you guys are seeing on your screen Daniel Jeremiah, the co-host of the Move the Sticks podcast, and you see him on NFL Network doing a lot of draft coverage. What are your thoughts on the Falcons making that big splashy TV hire and Daniel Jeremiah following Mike Mayock from the TV screen into the front office for an NFL team?
I'd be open to it. I think I respect a heck of a lot, Jeremiah's work.
He did not have Vic Beasley highly rated, so that
there you go. That's worth something, right?
A lot of Falcons fans right there. So we saw that coming, I guess you could say.
Although, side note, you did ask me recently who was the last draft pick I wanted the Falcons to draft that they did, and sadly, it was Vic Beasley.
That's why I kind of thought it was that. The thing I always say is, like, the more Falcon fans like a pick, the worse the player winds up being.
Now, again, I will say that was before I really got into actually studying prospects. I just, in passing, watching college football on, Saturday when I had the time, seeing Vic Beasley, scream off the edge in college, I was like, man, it'd be something if the Falcons could get an explosive edge rusher like that. And, seeing what he did at the combine, kind of just that, fell in love there then. And I was sold, like, hey, man, if he could fall to 8, that would be great. But again, a lot, not to get off on a rant on Vic Beasley, but more than, what has happened with him is more than meets the eye. I think, again, we don't know these players. We don't talk with them. We had Jeff Schultz on the show. He's probably the closest we've had as a guest to someone who actually talks to these guys. And, he brought up, maybe losing interest in the game or love of the game. And who knows what led to that. But again, you don't know, you could draft a guy and he could love the game, 1 year. And, now that it's his job and everything, and he's a clean cut guy, which Vic Beasley was. I mean, he checked off that character box. So you just never know. Again, this is why the draft's a crapshoot. And while I've been pounding the table for Chase Young, and he seems like a sure thing, again, there's been guys going back in the day that seemed like a sure thing that turned out to not be a sure thing. So again, I don't even know why I got on this rant to begin with. Now,
No, I get it, and I don't want to necessarily, because this could turn into a 2-hour show if we get too much on the Vic Beasley thing. I hear what Jeff said last week. I'm not necessarily buying that. I kind of think that Vic Beasley's struggles are because he's not really a defensive end, and I feel like all of his issues that he's shown in the pros were issues that he showed at Clemson that I think a lot of people overlook because of him being an elite athlete. And I think a lot of it was because, specifically to Atlanta, we were so desperate for pass rush help that we just automatically wanted him to be the next John Abraham. And when he had that breakout 2016 season, we're like, oh, this is it. And I think had we been really evaluating him more closely, I think we would have been like, okay, let's pump the brakes on this. And I think what ended up happening was that basically, in a nutshell, Vic Beasley should have been treated the same exact way that the Seahawks treated Bruce Irvin, because I think they're very similar players, which is, a hybrid linebacker that occasionally rushes the quarterback. And I think the Falcons, spent the better part of, 4 years trying to make him into a pure defensive end and basically trying to change him into Cliff Averill, which, that was the player I compared him most to when he came out of Clemson. But I thought once we saw him on the field, it's like, oh no, he's more Bruce Irvin. And I think people have, my personal opinion, again, I don't know the players either, but my personal opinion is because the Falcons have kind of square pegged Vic Beasley and he hasn't taken to, that square peg, that square hole. I think people were like, well, he doesn't want it enough. And it's just like, well, if he had been better utilized, I don't think we would be questioning, his desire or his, love of football. I just think the Falcons have just kind of botched this whole thing from start to finish. And now we're sort of blaming the player when I think it's really been
that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing. And I think that's a great point. I mean, they're blaming the player too much, but honestly, this is, mismanagement of self-scouting of their team and their players. And again, don't put that necessarily on the player if you're trying to, as Aaron put it, fit a square peg into a round hole. I mean, if he should have been more of a hybrid player and not a defensive end, why are you trying to force it? That's, again, on the management, on the coaching staff, and not on Vic Beasley. And, because again, I feel bad for him. I like Vic. I think he's a great person, good in the community, which is important. I think that's the type of organization Arthur Blank wants to have. But, again, he hasn't been used in the right manner. And now we're seeing the fruits of that labor or lack thereof. And again, that's why, I'm not going to attack Vic Beasley. I don't think people should attack him. It just hasn't worked out, and it hasn't worked out because of how he's been utilized.
Yeah, the last point, just to kind of summarize sort of my thoughts if people weren't following. Like, basically what I'm saying is, like, to me, and this is kind of a stretch, but to me, it would be like if the Falcons asked Deion Jones to play defensive end, and then when you watch, Deion Jones struggle as a defensive end, you're like, well, he just doesn't want it enough. And it's like, no, he's not a defensive end. He should be more of a linebacker. And again, I know people are going to disagree on that because it's not an exact analogy, but it's kind of like, I think Vic Beasley on the spectrum of sort of, is he Von Miller versus Deion Jones? I think he's way closer to Deion Jones than he is to Von Miller. And I think because we wanted him to be Von Miller, we just sort of been trying to, shove that square peg into the round hole. And it's like, no, we needed to make some changes. But that's kind of my thoughts on it. But, Vic Beasley's going to be playing the next 8 games for the Falcons, and it'll be his last 8 games for the Falcons. And, I'm sure people will cheer his departure. And, I hope for his sake that he goes to a team that will, in my opinion, better utilize him and he winds up having success. Not only so I can throw it in people's face and see, I told you so, but just, because as Matt put, he's a likable player, and I hope he has success. There's no reason to root against players not having success just because they're not on a football team.
I hope he goes to the Ravens. I mean, that was a team that I threw out there in the trade rumors, trade discussions. It seemed like the one, analysts wanted a match to, but I think that's the type of team that'll utilize him best. And I'm also saying it selfishly because that's the team I'm adopting, or one of the teams I'm adopting the rest of the season. So probably carry forward that into next year. So you're not the only one now that has a fandom or stock in another team like you do with the Raiders or Dem Cardinals.
I'm on the Chiefs bandwagon this year because I need to root for somebody to beat the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. I feel like the Chiefs have the best shot, even though I know the Ravens just did it. So they'll be my plan B in the event that the Chiefs stumble as we get further into the season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm cool with Andy Reid getting the job done. I think we both said that Chiefs would be in the Super Bowl. I don't know. Did you predict the Chiefs winning it too?
I did. I think I had the Eagles winning it, which looks pretty bad.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, they could still go on a run, but I don't think this NFC is tough. It'll be fun to watch though. Despite our Falcons not being in it, I'm excited for some of these potential playoff matchups. It's a deep conference, and whoever comes out of it's going to be battle tested.
Yeah, I'm rooting for the Eagles just so they can beat the Saints or whoever can beat the Saints in the postseason. So that's how we'll go. So, All right, guys, appreciate you guys for tuning in. I know we said it was going to be an hour show, but we gave you 20 minutes of extra content. So definitely appreciate it by liking this video and making sure you subscribe to Pro Football Central on YouTube. Hit that bell icon so that you know when we go live. Check us out on Facebook at Falcons Central Radio. Of course, you can find us on Twitter. Our Twitter handles are on the screen for those of you watching. If you're not watching, you're listening to it. I am at FalFans. Matt is at Matt Caroly. That's MattKaroly. Of course, you can find the show's Twitter handle at Falcons PFC on Twitter. And if you're looking for the audio links, you can find all of those at ProFootballCentral.com. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher. You can find the other RSS feed and plug that into whatever your preferred podcast platform is for the audio version of the show. And I think we got a quick question from Mark Boulder, flashing it up on the screen. You got a final score prediction for this upcoming Saints game? Good grief, Mark.
I won't go that extreme.
That hurt my heart. See, goodness gracious.
Oh, Mark, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Oh, Mark, you're killing us. You're killing us.
Mark, are you even a Falcons fan?
No, he's not.
Oh, well, what are you doing, Mark? I'd say Saints by 13. I don't know what's the line. The line's like 12, so they would cover then, I guess.
Yeah. I'm gonna say like Saints 35, Falcons. I was gonna say maybe they get a backdoor cover, but probably not. 35-20.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully I'm wrong. I mean, like I said on Twitter, I put Embrace for Chase on hold for a week. I'd love to see, being that it's hate week, it's nothing more for a Falcons fan, especially in a season like this, than to, help spoil a potential high seed for the Saints, by getting a game over them like this. But
the last time we had a coach fire, we did sweep the Saints this season. So rooting for that again.
There you go. History may repeat itself, so we'll have to see. But yeah, not optimistic, but hey, we'll be tuning in. We'll have you covered, next week on it, and then we'll preview the Bucs game.
Absolutely. So we'll see you guys next week, and appreciate you guys for tuning in this week. So have a good night. Enjoy the rest of your hate week, and we'll see what the Falcons do on Sunday.